and introduce Connor Benedict. Sorry, I'm going to make sure that I read this correctly. So Connor Benedict is the Open Culture Coordinator at Creative Commons. He is joining us today from Lisbon, Portugal. The Open Culture Program at Creative Commons aims to support the development of a thriving open culture ecosystem among cultural heritage institutions and their users through three main areas: policy development, community engagement, and open infrastructure. So thanks, Connor, for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Josh, as well, for helping facilitate things. Okay, so I've got a short presentation, a bit about what we do that I'm going to share with you. Can everyone see the slides okay? Great.
They look great.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk a bit about license implementation, some developments we've been working on, and collaboration amongst organizations and IIIF. But before we get too far into it, I'd kind of like to get a feel of where everyone's coming from. So I'm just going to post a link in the chat here. Where'd it go? And you can go ahead and... No, it's not. Go ahead and add an X or some other icon from the dashboard on the left to show kind of where this community is at the moment. I'm curious to see just kind of where everyone is and get a sense of that. While you're doing that, I'll give a bit of introduction to myself. So my name is Connor Benedict. I'm the Open Culture Coordinator at Creative Commons. In this role, I do event and meeting coordination. I manage production and communication, including our Open Culture Voices series, and publishing all sorts of reports and guides. I also research how our licenses and tools are being used in cultural heritage institutions, and engage with other organizations and other communities like this one. So let's take a look. Where's everyone joining from? I see somewhere in the US. Very interesting. Thank you, guys. Okay, so a bit more about what I'm going to talk about. So an introduction to what is Creative Commons, in case you're not familiar, a bit more detail on the Open Culture Program. Then I'm going to talk about our needs assessment report, which looks at how our public domain tools are being used in cultural heritage institutions and the strategy that we've developed from that. And then obviously open it up to some questions that I have for you guys in the community, but also get some questions from you, which I'm sure you have. So Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting better sharing of culture and knowledge in the public interest. We have a set of copyright licenses and public domain tools, which I'm sure you're familiar with, or at least have heard of. And we are an international network of lawyers, activists, and experts in copyright law, open education, culture, and science. To understand Creative Commons, you have to understand a little bit about copyright. So in a nutshell, copyright is a set of exclusive rights that grant creators at the moment of creation, or as we like to say, when it is fixed in tangible form, exclusive rights for a limited period of time. This is typically the author or the creator's life plus a minimum of 50 years, and it varies from jurisdiction. Copyright law seeks to encourage creators to invest time and effort to create by ensuring this protection and enforcement. Creative works not under copyright are part of what is called the public domain. This is when the term has expired, for example, or if it was never protected by copyright law. Then the birth of Creative Commons. Our story begins with the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act from the United States from 1998. This act extended the term of copyright for every work in the United States by an additional 20 years. Lawrence Lessig, our founder, the founder of Creative Commons, took a case of a web publisher, his name was Eric Eldred, to the Supreme Court to defend the right for works to enter the public domain. Unfortunately, they lost the case and the copyright term in the United States was extended. A few years later, in 2002, Creative Commons published its first licenses, which gave creators a way to easily share their works with more permissions than traditional all rights reserved copyright terms. From the start, Creative Commons licenses were intended to be used by creators all over the world. Digital technologies and the internet have opened new ways for people to participate in culture, and we aim to help create a regulatory environment that supports creativity, collaboration, and sharing of creative works, upholding user rights, and enable a rich, robust, and thriving public domain. So as we can kind of see here, at the time of Creative Commons inception, there was an ability through the internet and new technology for things to become easily distributed and shared, but copyright law in most jurisdictions hindered how that was actually possible. So there was this disconnect, and CC licenses are kind of a way around that. So Creative Commons supports a copyright system that appropriately balances the rights of creators and the rights of users and the general public. So a bit more about our licenses. The CC licenses, where copyright is considered all rights reserved, Creative Commons licenses are some rights reserved. This some rights reserved term is very common on platforms such as Flickr, which indicates that there are some permissions that are granted beyond traditional copyright. CC licenses enable creators to offer more permission than traditional copyright, given the increased flexibility and freedom of the internet. These are legal tools to better support creators. They include typically 3 layers: a human readable text, a legal code, and a machine readable data. Each license has a set of symbols that explain how a work can be used. The 4 license elements are BY, SA, NC, and D, combined to make up 6 different license options. 4 conditions are attribution, which is a specific form of giving credit to the original creator and must be followed when using or adapting the work. So this is what in copyright terms is called attribution, but in lay terms, it's typically called giving credit. Share alike, all derivative work must be shared with the same license. Non-commercial, permission for commercial usage rights are withheld, so you can't use the work for commercial purposes. Non-derivative, the work can be shared, but only if it remains unchanged. So a derivative work is any new work where a new copyright would arise. Those works are not allowed to be shared publicly. All of these licenses include the BY condition, which requires that the creator be attributed in the connection with their work. Beyond that commonality, the licenses vary. 1, for commercial use, the work is permitted or not, and 2, whether the work can be adapted, and if so, on what terms. So if it is adapted, for example, under the share alike term, you have to use the same license or similar terms, and the no derivative means that if you do adapt the work, you are not allowed to share it publicly. Besides that, we have 2 public domain tools, which I'll talk about next. So our 2 public domain tools are CC0 and the public domain mark. CC0 means that no rights are reserved. Our public domain dedication is not a license, but a legal tool that you can use to waive your copyright in a work, effectively dedicating it to the public domain in as far as you can. Creators waive all their rights and place their work directly and immediately in the public domain by doing this. By doing so, you do not necessarily release your moral rights. In some countries, your moral rights are maintained. A lot of institutions and creators use this for things like scientific data. And it's also become quite a trend within the NFT and distributed web spaces to use CC0 for digital creations. One use case is SpaceX, who releases all their images of space into the public domain using CC0. They are contracted by NASA, but since they don't work directly for the US government, their images aren't automatically considered public domain. But SpaceX still wanted to make its images available to the public, so they used CC0 tool. It's the only legal tool that lets a creator relinquish their rights worldwide. Then the public domain mark is a label used to mark works known to be free of all copyright restrictions. Unlike CC0, the public domain mark has no legal effect when applied. It is only intended to signify or show that a work is known to be, or as best as we know, is known to be part of the public domain, and it's just a way to communicate things. So a key difference here is that all the licenses have both a deed, which is the human readable text that explains the terms, and a legal code, whereas the public domain mark does not have a legal code. It only has a human readable interface that explains what the mark signifies. So all of this combined, we have 6 open copyright licenses and 2 public domain tools. All these options exist on a spectrum of restrictiveness to freedom. As you can see, the most restrictive is copyright itself, and the most freedom is the public domain. CC licenses exist in between, granting more permission than copyright. There are some instances where licenses don't apply. By design, CC licenses do not reduce, limit, or restrict any rights under exceptions and limitations to copyright, such as fair use, fair dealing, or provisions for people with disabilities, as the ones contemplated in the Marrakesh Treaty. If you use a CC licensed material, if your use of CC licensed material would otherwise be allowed of an applicable exception, you do not need to rely on the CC license or comply with its terms and conditions. This is a fundamental principle of CC licensing. Another important part of where licenses don't apply is for works that are in the public domain. So CC licenses should not be applied to works in the worldwide public domain. All CC licenses are clear that they do not have the effect of placing restrictions on material that would otherwise be unrestricted. And you cannot revoke a work from the public domain by applying a CC license to it. This is especially interesting in the cultural heritage sector, which I'll get to in a moment. If you want to dedicate your own work to the public domain, as I mentioned, we recommend using the public domain dedication, CC0. And if a work is already in the worldwide public domain, you should mark it or signify it with the public domain mark. Another instance where this is interesting is how it is being interpreted at the moment, or how US copyright law is being interpreted at the moment regarding AI training, which is currently allowed under a fair use exception to copyright. So if you are allowed to train a model, an AI model, a large learning model, using a fair use exception, then there is no license, including copyright, that can prevent that use. Just a bit of data about our global commons. As of 2017, there were officially 1.4 billion works in the commons, and now we estimate that it's closer to 2.5 billion. So the Open Culture Program is focused on how galleries, libraries, archives, and museums have been the gate openers to the world's cultural heritage for centuries and play a fundamental role for the communities that they serve. They provide resources and services for enjoyment, education, research, and the advancement of knowledge, and stimulate creativity and innovation in the service of global sustainable development. When CC licenses were created, cultural heritage institutions found that they were an excellent tool for releasing their digitized materials. By making their collections openly accessible, shareable, and reusable as possible, both on-site and online, they empower people generation after generation in offering them the scientific, historical, and sociocultural resources to build a future for themselves and their communities. Open culture's most exciting potential is to empower creators anywhere in the world to discover, share, reuse, and remix cultural heritage. We see open culture as a catalyst for the dissemination and revitalization of culture, a spark for the creation of new cultural expressions and experiences, and an engine for sustainable cultural, economic, and social development where culture as a global public good takes center stage. For GLAM institutions and other entities working in cultural heritage, there are generally 4 types of content that can be made available under open access. The first is digitized works stewarded by a cultural heritage institution whose rights have expired and are therefore in the public domain. For example, works from 19th century painter Claude Monet would be considered in the public domain. So the digitized version of that would also be in the public domain. Works, the second category would be works and the other original content currently under copyright and created by other people who have given their permission to share their works with as few copyright restrictions as possible. For example, a researcher that donates their manuscripts to an archive, or an artist that donates their work to a museum, each providing the permission to release these materials as open access. The third is works and other original content to which GLAM institutions own the rights. For example, original research produced by employees or contractors in the context of an exhibition. And the fourth category is any type of metadata produced by the institution. For works under copyright, we generally recommend for institutions to use CC BY and CC BY SA. We believe that this is the best use of the license that adds the least restriction. CC BY SA or CC BY share alike licenses ensure that resharing happens under the same license type and terms. Other licenses create additional lockups that may further restrict items that exist in the public domain. When there is uncertainty about whether a work is in the global public domain, it is again recommended that CC0, our public domain dedication, be used in order to free up the work as much as legally possible. Applying a license or using a public domain tool, this is what we call marking the work with the license to designate the terms. To avoid any doubt, it's best to be as clear as possible what the license is applied to. For example, is it everything on the website, everything on the page, just an image or text, or something else? You can do this by adding a badge or icon to the material, using an abbreviation in the description, writing it out, writing the license terms out, or adding information to the metadata as a tag, such as CC0 or the link, the direct link to the resource. In 2023, we published a report about CC's public domain tools, how they were addressing the needs of cultural heritage institutions. Our survey data led to a number of results and insights on how to improve our tools and services. A key result was that about 53% want a way to ensure the institution gets credit, so that their work in terms of digitization, preservation, dissemination, and all that gets recognized. As well, 49% want an easy way to track the reuse of material. Those two kind of go hand in hand. They want to be able to see the impact, measure the impact of the work that they do, but also see and point out successes and the use of their digital collections. Further insights included an additional study of the survey showed that institutions aren't clear or consistent with users about what to include when providing credit. For example, under the metadata tag credit, institutions might list the artist or creator, just the institution website, the donor, for example, the person who gave the work to an institution, or nothing at all. But rarely or never, they would provide all the information needed to provide adequate credit, such as the title of the work, the author, the license, the source link, and the name of the institution. Also, many institutions apply CC licenses to public domain material, which creates confusion and ambiguity as to the copyright status of the work. This means they often use CC BY or other licenses to ensure credit to the institution. We also concluded that further research and engagement was needed with technology providers in the cultural heritage sector on the implementation of CC's licenses and tools and recommended best practices. Since Creative Commons doesn't provide collections management software, we're not always the first source of implementation of the licenses and tools with the collection. We are looking at many aspects, including the digitization process, as well as the dissemination of the work, to understand better how to provide information on best practices and use of tools and licenses. In the report, we proposed a number of strategies to address these and other needs. For example, to participate in related discussions and partner organized events, such as this one and the online event in December. To explore implementation solutions, such as developing new resources and guides, also in collaboration with partners, such as with you guys. To create cookbooks, guides, and other resources in this area, provide opportunities for training when needed, such as our CC certificate, and other courses. So that kind of wraps up what Creative Commons is, what the Open Culture Program is, and our most recent work related to our public domain tools and their use in cultural heritage institutions. And so I only have one question for you, which is, what can CC do for you or the IIIF community or for yourself? And what questions do you have for Creative Commons? Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. One thing I want to just pull out is that Mathilde's had an issue getting the Jamboard to fill out your map. I also had an issue with that, so I'm going to reshare the link here. So if anyone didn't get a chance to do it earlier and wants to add their mark on the map, it's in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That was excellent. And yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions piling up in the chat. Josh, do you want to jump in and then with your question?
Well, my question was a response to another question, and it gets at a pretty meaty thing about AI. So maybe start somewhere.
Okay. Okay, so before we totally derail the conversation, talking about AI, because I think we could probably fill the remaining 30 minutes with just that. Yes. Are there any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to read them out for you, or to unmute and speak up on your own. You can also raise your virtual hand.
Go ahead, Matthias.
Hi, Matthias, jump in.
I'm on mute. No, I'm not long, I'm mute. Hello, Connor, thank you for your presentation. Really great and precise stuff. I've attended some presentations by Lawrence Lessig, so I also linked one of his early talks from 2002, recommended for everybody. However, I have a question.
Yes.
Creative Commons share alike is kind of a chain model. So if you take something, you have to put the same license on your stuff, and this happens over and over again. How comes that I don't see any of this CC share alike trains where I see all the people before me that use that material as well and to build on top of my stuff? It must be really a long expression of these share alike license notifications. You get my question?
Yeah, so we actually don't track the application of a license. So there's not really a way to track when material is used in that way. So in theory, if someone is creating the right attribution, they will give credit to the person that whose work they're adapting and whatever came before that, if they understand that adaptation. But in practice, what most people do is only attribute one step back, because that's technically only what's required.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and I have a question in the chat. How would you mark orphan photographs?
So is this the European idea of orphan photographs, that you cannot find the creator? Is that how I should understand it? Or you can't find the author to get permission? Okay. Well, if it's still in copyright, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you very specific advice, but if it's still in copyright, you should err on the side of caution. I'm not perfectly familiar with the law in Europe, but I do know there are exceptions for where you can show the effort that you've put in to try and find the creator and author, and then by doing so, you can release something online. But from Creative Commons perspective, we can't tell you to distribute something you don't have the rights to distribute. If you can't find the creator but you can show that it's outside of copyright, then we would recommend using CC0.
jump back in. Matthias, is your hand raised? Yeah,
Yes,
just
it
jump
is.
back in.
Given the situation that you found a very lovely old painting book, whatever, so really centuries old, and you have a license like CC BY, the institution, the GLAM, does it make sense at all? Because it was not the library or any of the members of the library who has created this ancient work. So how to deal with such situations? Is it simply a way to ignore it and assume that this is in the public domain, or do I have to get a lawyer and fight the battle against the misassignment of the CC license in this case?
You can ask the institution if they're sure or why they're applying a copyright license. If they're straightforward, a lot of times it's a mistake. Honestly, there's a lot of institutions that don't fully understand what putting a copyright license on public domain material means. But if all the information provided is that it should be in the public domain, and the country has implemented the European Copyright Directive that says digital reproductions of public domain material should also be in the public domain. I would say you can err on the side of caution that it would be fine to reuse under public domain terms and not under the license terms. But talk to a lawyer for specific advice. Sorry.
And of course, it might be a difference whether it's a 2D or 3D artifact. So I'm not a lawyer myself, but if you take a photo of a 3D thing, you add some creative new creativity to the item that you produce. So a 2D photo of an old 3D stuff has the ability to get a new copyright by myself, the photographer.
Yeah. There's a lot of debate around that. We tend to say that it should not, faithful digital reproductions of public domain material should not create any new copyright or adjacent rights. There's not a specific law that says that photos of 3D material are also in the public domain, but we believe they should be. A lot of institutions tend to, if they're hiring a photography service or they have an in-house photographer and the copyright is with the institution, they will also use CC0 or public domain clarification to say that even if a copyright were to exist, they still dedicate that all to the public domain. So there are best practices that you can say that institutions do. Whether individuals do that, that's another thing. So taking a photo of yourself taking a photo of a very old sculpture, yeah, not a clear answer.
It depends, yes. Thank you.
Okay, another question from the chat. If a work is in the public domain, why bother to include a CC license? So I guess in this case, why do the public domain marker?
So the public, I guess we use the public domain mark as it's a way to signify that it's in the public domain because lots of people don't know. So just because something is very old, if you have it in a digital collection online, it's not immediately obvious to all users what the status is just by knowing that it's old. So the idea with the public domain mark is to say to anyone that finds the work, this is in the public domain and you can use it. And CC0 does the same thing, but it provides the legal certainty if you're unsure. Yeah. I'll also add on the CC0 public domain mark discussion, because there is a bit of ambiguity between the two. There is it was also an outcome of this needs assessment report that I mentioned. There is a current development to actually integrate the two so that you are doing the same thing with one tool. So if it is in the public domain, it signifies it. And if you're unsure of the public domain status, it puts it into the legal certainty. And we announced it at Summit that process is going to happen. So stay tuned for either a re-release of CC0 or a new public domain mark that kind of integrates the two to reduce this confusion between the two and how to use them.
Okay. Any other questions?
So maybe somebody wants to answer my question, which is, what can CC do for you? Is there anything that you have seen from our work or from my presentation where you see we can provide more guidance or more support, or have any thing that you learned that you might want us to do better? If not, then we can jump into the AI question. Yeah.
I don't have an answer to your question, but another one came to my mind. The CC movement is quite successful, so hooray, hooray. What has changed during the recent 20 years? So what has happened in the last 5 years, for example? Do you have plans, or do you see the needs for any other CC models? I mean, we have CC 4.0. Is there any 5.0 in the works? And if so, why?
Yeah, like I said, the one thing that I'm sure of is this integration of CC0 and PDM to kind of integrate them into one tool, public domain tool, to reduce that ambiguity. I don't think there are plans for a 5.0 series, because the evolution from 3.0 to 4.0 was that the 3.0 and before, the legal code and legal text became what is called ported. So they were translated into a legal text that was applied to different jurisdictions. And what we did with the 4.0 series is, instead of translating the legal text into legal code for different jurisdictions, we made an international license that used international terminology based on Berne Convention copyright terms, so that it applied to every country that signed to the Berne Convention. As from there, I don't know what's exactly next, what has changed. Besides that, obviously the AI question and this question of machine learning and how that relates to copyright is very much undecided, at least in the US. And in Europe, there are exceptions for machine learning practices related to copyright, but it's also limited to a service of public good. There needs to be it's allowed under an exception, but it needs to be for the public good. So that's one major change. Besides that, I think the area of cultural heritage, like you said, with 3D replications is still not completely clear, because there isn't a national or global policy that says faithful reproductions of public domain material is also, in 3D form, is also public domain. So that's one area that I think we are also working on.
Okay, go on with the AI question in the chat.
Yeah, what is the AI question?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of a side conversation going on in the chat. And I'll just say, started with this comment: struggling with fair use allowing AI training. Isn't this part of the issue with the actors' strike, where actors' voices are being used without their consent to train AI, and also with authors' works being used? How can their rights be protected with AI?
Yeah, Josh, you do kind of say that's a moral right. You do also have copyright on, like, if you say a recording, or if you make a recording, you have copyright of how that specific recording gets used, but how your person gets used is the moral rights. To train a voice AI model, you might CC by. Well, as I said, if the machine learning process is happening in the United States, where at the moment it's being considered an exception, a fair use exception, to copyright, the license doesn't activate. There's no license, not even copyright, can protect that use from the machine learning model. So unless there's a change in how the Copyright Office or how US legislators are deciding those things, that training is going to be allowed under a fair use exception, and the license matters, but it doesn't matter for that. If you're going to use something yourself and a CC by audio recording yourself to do something, you have to abide by the license terms, unless you also have a fair use exception to do so.
Yeah, I think this also might be adding some complexity that some of us may be thinking about US copyright law, which, you know, a lot of the AI training AI models is based on the Google Books case, and that may not be applicable everywhere. So we're talking about a global issue with localized knowledge. Okay, Josh.
Yeah, so I guess I would just make a general comment, and this is really, I love this. This is coming up in the IIIF context. This really isn't, you know, related to. I mean, it's related to IIIF in the sense that it is part of our domain and our, you know, our sets of materials. But I guess the reason I'm sort of very active in the comments here is that I've sort of looked into this a lot and trying to get a handle on like how as a domain and how individual institutions can respond. And I guess I would make a general comment that as an industry, we should be very careful not to try to use copyright, I think, to battle or address what we see as like we sort of intuitively think are some like inappropriate uses or misuses of material. But copyright is not the only tool to address these things, and that's why I think things like moral rights and some of these other things are valid avenues. And I guess to put a specific point on it, to raise the point about fair use is such a critical thing, particularly in the US, and there are different examples of it elsewhere in the world. But I would just really caution people not to go down the path of maybe like trying to put more, you know, structured strictures around fair use, because fair use is the thing that won us so many abilities to do transformative works for things like disability use, right? Blind and print disabilities. Like there's so many things that are premised on fair use that I really worry for us. I worry that people immediately go to things like copyright as a way to, you know, as the simplest way or the quickest answer that comes to mind as a way to address issues with machine learning and AI. And I worry that we might we might do ourselves a disservice in limiting fair use, you know, like for good reasons, but you know, accidentally or inadvertently, block other paths that are available to us. Anyway, that's a long comment, not a question, but I guess I wonder, Connor, if this comes up, you know, I know that Creative Commons is obviously very focused on advocacy around, you know, around copyright and making more explicit, as you very well put, you know, putting new licenses together to do that kind of granularity. Maybe similar to Matthias's question earlier, like is there sort of a future in which there's a Creative Commons mechanism for, you know, for allowances or you know, where that discussion sort of lives in your world?
Yeah, I mean, there's I think a lot of the frustration, at least from the creator side, is this question of remuneration, right? It's like they don't want to lose the copyright and they don't want AI to be a fair use exception because they lose control of being able to earn a living and provide for themselves based on their copyrights. So yeah, CC by non-AI is an idea. There is this process at CC at the moment, which is looking at labeling, not so more towards the direction of PDM, to signify use that is and is not created using AI tools, or that does and does not allow it to be used for AI training. The problem we've seen still at the moment is that as long as it's a fair use exception, it would just be a courtesy ask and it not enforceable. So I think what is likely to happen is further further consultation. We've seen a lot of US legislators and European legislators trying to sit down and find solutions that both consider the public good of AI models and machine learning models and the individual interests of creators and the need for those copyright things to be protected. But it's very much a non-solved problem at the moment. And in the, in this space, in the cultural heritage space, there is this clear break between public domain material, which is a lot of what cultural heritage institutions are digitizing and making available online, and the copyright protected works of digital collections. So how those things interact is also interesting, because asking machine learning models to differentiate that also becomes tricky, even though they don't necessarily need to. Yeah. The other end of the model is always the output. At the moment, it doesn't seem like the outputs of any of these models are protectable by copyright either. They haven't risen to the threshold of what is considered human input or originality that can justify copyright for it either. So if all of that ends up in the public domain or in this global digital commons as well, then it just adds to the digital creation. But the other thing that we're also seeing quite a lot of is this idea of plagiarism. So if it spits out something identical to something that was part of the inputs, that's a plagiarism question, but that seems to be, that legal question is easier to fight rather than the fair use one.
Can you say it again a little bit more slowly? I think you said something like the output of AI models is always public domain. I really not hitting the name right now.
Yeah, they haven't come out and said it's public domain, but nothing so far has risen to the point of copyright protection. So what's coming out of these systems hasn't been copyrightable. Nobody's been able to submit something to a copyright office and ask for copyright protection for the work.
If we manage to get one share alike into the AI model, then everything that comes out of it is also share alike, right?
No, because most of the training is an exception to copyright, so the license doesn't matter. I wish. I mean, there probably is. That's the thing, They definitely ingested most of Flickr. So if most of Flickr is in there and they're all using share alike licenses, and the share alike license on Flickr is also the one that requires explicit reference for every instance of its use. So you have to say every single item that's included and the license terms. So the images would be they would have a nice big border with all the inputs if they used if the license applied. But because of the fair use exception, it doesn't quite trigger that way.
Are you a lawyer yourself?
No, but I spend a lot of time with lawyers. Yeah.
This is making me think we need to have a community call with maybe some IP attorneys.
Yeah, plenty of them.
It would be nice if someone said, "Are you a lawyer?" And we could say yes, though
Yeah.
not your lawyer.
Yeah, no, you
okay.
can talk to them. They're here,
Yeah.
don't worry.
And Josh just shared a link to, yeah, have I been trained? So yeah, which I think we were seeing this probably all over social media as, creators, authors were, I think disappointed that they were included in the AI model, but also I wonder if maybe they would have been disappointed if they were not deemed important enough to go into the AI model. Yeah, so I guess there's to what Josh said earlier about maybe we don't think about copyright as the tool for fixing these known problems, because they may spur other larger problems in their wake. what was did this come up in your needs assessment? Was this like a thing that was on people's minds in terms of the licenses, or is this something that we've just fixated on in this hour?
This AI question, it was too early. Our needs assessment went out January 1st, 2022 and closed March 30th, 2022. So if we had waited, I don't know, 6 months, maybe it might have been on somebody's radar, but the AI thing is barely a year old at this moment. So unfortunately, I mean, that it's part of the global conversation on the topic, it's a bit too recent, unfortunately. I think if we were to redo it, that would be the only response that we got. How are we dealing with AI? But yeah, one of the points that I brought up towards the end was this question of credit, and I think that also ties into this, which is how are institutions who are doing all of the work, preserving and disseminating and making available this work, being acknowledged for their contributions and for that effort. And again, the legal tool or a legal tool or mandating it as part of a public domain thing doesn't seem to be the right solution. So it's not a copyright solution that's going to get people who reuse this material to give credit to the institution. We need a new idea or a new framework or a new guide, a best practice from institutions that are doing it well, that are getting recognized for their work, that are providing the information to their users, and to make it the norm that when you use cultural heritage material from these institutions, you say thank you. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The licenses to it. The tricky thing with the licenses, as I kind of mentioned, is that the attribution, right, isn't required under CC0 or the public domain mark. So most of the stuff in collections, there's no legal requirement for people to provide credit, and we don't require credit to the institution even for CC BY or CC BY SA or any of the other licenses. So it's very much a courtesy ask that could be integrated into the cookbook or into another guideline or best practice that says, if you're providing stuff to the public, make sure that your credit statement or what you're asking for, when you're putting these platforms out there, when you're asking for getting credit, make sure that it includes the title, the author, and the institution, not just less than that. And we've seen that there's kind of a mismatch in that sense. They want to get credit, but they're also not helping themselves by not providing the information that they want.
Yeah, I can say I spend a lot of time on the collections websites of our members, and there's a very wide breadth between, some will say nothing in terms of, what their preferred attribution structure. And then some of them are down to, this is what we want to see if you're doing it online. This is what we want to see if you're putting this in print. This is what we'd like to see. And sometimes those very prescriptive methods are easier to match than, providing no guidance at all. So do you have is there a Creative Commons, do you provide a suggested attribution statement for folks to put on their website? I know you just said the title, the creator, and the institution, but is that somewhere for people to collect?
Yeah, we have a general one for attribution in general. But again, this is this going to everyone now? Yes, okay. I figured out how to use Zoom in 2023. This is attribution in general. These are best practices for attribution. We ask for TASL, title, author, source, license. Since CC0 and the public domain mark don't require that, it's hard to kind of say, follow our best practices for attribution, even though it's not a requirement. What we're working on at the moment, and what I would actually be happy to maybe collaborate with someone here on, is tailoring this ask specifically to institutions to include TAS ill institution in a guideline that says, if you're telling your users to give us credit, make sure you say the title, author, source, license, so that it's in the public domain or something, and the institution that it comes from. Because I think there's an opportunity to collaborate on a guide for something like that, but I also think there's a need from the community of users and the community of institutions to actually provide that resource.
Okay, so we're 5 minutes from the top of the hour. Do we have any last questions or comments or anything else? No, Matthias, I think you could get one more question. We got 5 minutes. We could do it.
No, I don't ask on the relation between creative work and licensing source code, so don't dive into this one. But I really enjoyed the session today, so thank you very much.
What I can say on source code is we don't recommend using CC licenses for code, because, well, first of all, there are a lot better licenses, GPL, for example, another license, the Apache licenses. But for the most part, they don't cover, unlike software licenses, CC licenses do not contain specific terms about the distribution of code and its modifiability and privacy. And those things are usually integral to software licenses, and CC licenses don't deal with that. So we actually have this FAQ question that might answer your thing about.
My non-question. Thanks a lot.
Look, we got some quick resolution there in a minute. Okay, so unless we have any more questions, I'll give maybe 5 more seconds. I'm going to wrap us up today. So Connor will actually be back with us during the online meeting. So if you, everyone will have a chance to hear a little bit more about Creative Commons licenses, best practices, and implementations. And if you have other questions that pop up between now and next month, Connor hopefully put his email address there, but you could certainly ask him on the spot during the Q&A after his lightning talk. And why not? So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Connor, for this presentation and the really exciting and interesting Q&A. And we will see you all again next month.
Bye, thanks.
Okay, bye.